Welcome back to another edition of the Hart2Heart Podcast. And my guest today is Dean Scott, the founder of DLC Anxiety and also the author of the book Greater Than Panic. So Dean, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be on here. Looking forward to answering the questions.
Yeah, so, I've seen your page on Instagram. It's pretty famous now. I think you've got, well over 1 million followers, lots of people following you. You've got an app, you've got a book. So, how did you start, DLC Anxiety?
Yeah, so back in 2016, I lost my father. I did like any guy would do, try to get back into work at the time to try and distract myself from it. And it was a real bad decision that I made at the time because I didn't process any grief. I didn't process the emotions of losing a father. And what happened was a few months later, I developed panic attacks, which then led into a panic disorder, which was then a 2-year battle of trying to overcome this panic disorder. I did all the right things. I went to the doctor as I did self-help resources, and I opened up to my friends and people around me, and that helped me on my journey to overcoming a panic disorder. And I remember a conversation that I had with one of my friends at the time, and this was when I was really feeling isolated and alone with all the symptoms that I was feeling. I didn't know that other people felt these symptoms, and when I spoke to him, he told me that all the symptoms that I was feeling, it was like he was speaking them back to me. He'd been through it before. So it was like this breath of fresh air. It was like almost like a boulder that came off my shoulder at the time, knowing that other people go through these panic attacks. So I wanted to bottle up that feeling of hope that guy gave me and try and spread it to as many people as possible. So when I overcame the panic disorder, I wanted to share my message to others that you can overcome panic attacks, you can overcome these anxiety disorders. And I wanted to just tell as many people as I could. And that's where I came across, I started doing it locally so I can support groups. But then I wanted to get the message out further. So that's where I came across Instagram. And there was only a few people at the time that was telling their anxiety stories, maybe 2 or 3 different accounts. And it all started from there. I started telling my story. It started to gain traction. And then it was almost like a domino effect over the years that's got us to where we are now, which is, I think it's 2.5 million community members across the platforms of Instagram. We have a smaller mental health pathways account. And also on TikTok, we've got nearly 1 million followers as well now.
Excellent. So your audience is really growing, and obviously, the more good information you put out, I imagine that's just going to grow even more for you in the future. So that's excellent to hear. So there's a couple things that I wanted to ask you about in your story there. So how old were you when you had your first panic attack?
So this would be 2016. So the first panic attack after my dad passing away would be 2016, which was 8 years ago, so I would have been 30. But I believe that I've had panic attacks before that. I just didn't know it was a panic attack.
Okay, so when can you think back, if you can, when do you think you had then your very first panic attack?
So the very first one, that's a great question. I used to do swimming professionally from the age as a child and then up to the age of 18. And I remember during the swimming events that I would often feel this weird and horrible feeling like something wasn't right, something was wrong, like there was something wrong with me. And I remember that those feelings would last for a good 10 to 30 minutes. At the time, though, I just put it down to I was feeling off, or maybe I hadn't eaten something right because I've been swimming and been doing this exercise. So I didn't actually realize at the time that it was anxiety or panic.
Okay, so would you say that from the time you had that attack until the time you had your first one after your father's death, were your symptoms then somewhat controlled during that period? Or do you think that you should have sought medical advice maybe even during that period?
I think more controlled. I definitely think it was so. My mum is an anxious person, and I definitely think there's a hereditary form of that the anxiety's passed on down the generation. So I think I always was a worrier. I always had this like simmering of anxiety, but as opposed to an anxiety disorder, yes, I don't think I had an anxiety disorder. I don't think I had an anxiety disorder growing up. I think that the anxiety disorder only came after the grief.
Understood. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes it doesn't happen with regards to panic attacks, meaning that sometimes there is an initiating event, whereas other times you can just kind of start off like you had it when you were a little bit younger, and then they just precipitate more and more and more, and then because of that, then people start overthinking about it, and then because they're overthinking about it, that generally then just precipitates even more panic attacks. But for you, it seems like you didn't follow exactly that order. You had a panic attack when you were, swimming. Then you had this period where, it would maybe happen on and off, but you were still more or less in control of your life. But then you had one precipitating event, and then boom, it was something that went from something that you could control to something that you couldn't control. Is that fairly accurate?
Yeah, that's a great assumption. The major difference from the swimming to the panic attack after my father was the intensity. So when I had that first panic attack after my dad passed away, I felt like I was dying. I didn't know what was happening. I had these horrible physical sensations and emotional sensations, a feeling of detachment from my body. These are all symptoms that I'd never felt before previously. They was just almost like a simmering of anxiety, maybe even an anxiety attack that hadn't gone into full flight or fight with a panic attack. However, the first one after my dad passed away was a full-on panic attack, and that is what, like you just mentioned, that is what led to the panic disorder. It was the experience of going through one of these extreme panic attacks that then I became fearful of having another one. So as you know, the brain identifies where you had that panic attack, which for myself was in the middle of a shopping center. So every time I would then go to the same shopping center, I would then get these panic attacks. So I did what a normal person would do, but is the complete wrong thing you should do when you are going through an anxiety disorder. I started to avoid the shopping center, and then lo and behold, even when I was driving towards the shopping center, I'd start to get the anxiety and panic. And then I realized my safe space was getting smaller and smaller and smaller over the time because of the avoidance that I was putting in.
Interesting. And, I actually did want to ask you about that today because I saw one of your videos and you were talking about the shopping center. I forget who the lady was you were podcasting with, but, you talk about this, and I'm really happy that you do, about exposure therapy. And, I think exposure therapy is, the best, treatment for panic attacks. It's really the best treatment for really any anxiety disorder. And for people who don't know what exposure therapy is, it's very, very simple. Whatever you're afraid of, you basically expose yourself to. And there's different ways of doing this. Some people like to do it very, very gradually. And then some people, like to use a flooding method, they call it. And so it's great that you're actually bringing up this specific thing where you're going to the shopping center and getting this panic attack, because ironically, I ask the question a lot to my patients, all my PTSD patients, who gets the groceries in your family and how does that go, kind of thing. And, most of the time they'll say that, they can't go to the grocery store. It's one of the most difficult places for people to go to when they have PTSD. Again, I've worked with, hundreds, if not thousands of veterans that have PTSD and have helped treat them. And, the grocery store is always one of the big things. So I hear, people can't go in there, or when they do go in there, they get overwhelmed, or sometimes they get things in their cart and then all of a sudden they just, have to leave their cart and leave the store. So in terms of exposure therapy, like, for some people, what I'll say is, go with someone and go very, very late at night. And then, when there's not too many people around, try that, see if you can do that for maybe a couple weeks. Then maybe, a couple weeks later, you can maybe go a little bit earlier when there's, less people around. And then, the time after that, maybe the person just sits in the car, but they don't come in with you, and so on. So, I think that exposure therapy is, a fantastic way to, reduce your anxiety and reduce your fears. But how did you overcome yours specifically, Dean?
Yeah, there's so much I could mention on exposure therapy. Completely agree with you for what you say, most anxiety related problems. So when I spoke to the doctor, they gave me good self-help resources for me to look at CBT techniques. I did psychology at university, so very interested in psychology in general. So I would study, and as you know, when you're anxious, all you want to do is find a solution, right? It's the fear of the unknown. So I would study the hell out of these things, and I came across exposure therapy. Came across, like you said, the two different methods, flooded, gradual, and I've always been someone to throw myself into the deep end. So I went with the flooded method. So I just put myself into the shopping centres. It was horrible the first time I did it. Of course, the anxiety came. My body was telling me to run away. But I just put myself in that situation and maybe stay there for 10 minutes, whereas the time before, maybe I was only there for 5 minutes. So it was almost like flooded, but building it up gradually as well. And I think from the science of the research that I've done as well, I think that the success of gradual and flooded exposure therapy is pretty similar. So I think I always say that one person's anxiety recovery is their own toolkit that they can put together to manage to help them overcome an anxiety disorder. So I think it's definitely a personal preference of which method to do. But I think over the time in the community, and knowing that when someone's going through anxiety and they're in this fight or flight mode where everything is always switched on, I think I lean more towards the gradual exposure now for someone going through anxiety. So I just wanted to know your take on that, on gradual versus flooded. And also, I just wanted to ask, just from your experience, why do you think the shopping centre is a major trigger for people with anxiety?
Well, I'll answer that one first because I think it really hits everything, So first of all, there's going to be a lot of people there, right? Second of all, too, you have to make decisions, in the shopping center. That's something that, doesn't really come into account when you're kind of going there. Like you do have to decide, do we need to get this? Do we need to get that? Sometimes people, bring lists. Obviously, that's something that I advocate for my patients as well, to bring in a list because some people will go and then they'll get frustrated, because they forgot what they need at home. So there are some, things you can do to kind of, mitigate it, but overall, it still does hit, a lot of the things that people have to do because you have to get there too. So you have to drive. So you're leaving your house. And for a lot of people, even leaving their house, can be very difficult. And then for some people too, unfortunately, they're in a situation where maybe someone's not around and they have to drive and they have a little bit of a fear of driving as well. It does. And then also too, you have to interact with someone unless I guess you can use the self checkouts, but for the most part, you do have to interact with someone. So there's a lot of different things that, go on within a grocery store, like at a concert, you're not really making as many decisions. Even though, there's tons of people around, you're not sort of, dependent upon, getting an item that you need to take home, for yourself or someone else. So there's just less like decisions to be made in some of these other stressful situations. But the grocery store, there's a little bit of executive functioning going on there because of the decisions you have to make. And then, it can be in a very, very crowded area.
That's really interesting what you said about the decision making. I've never actually put that together with it. So another thing that I noticed, well, obviously when you're in this anxiety fight or flight, you notice everything around you. But I remember vividly the fluorescent lights that these supermarkets have.
Yes.
Being almost a trigger, and also the wide aisles, like you say. So if you get a lot of people in these wide aisles, I felt that was a trigger. But that's really interesting what you said about the decision making because I've never thought of it that way.
Yeah. So, when you're combining decision making with a stressful situation, the brain just gets overloaded more easily, and so fight or flight is more likely to occur. And then your other question that you had for me, sorry, I kind of...
flooded versus gradual.
Yeah, flooded versus gradual.
Do you see a difference in the outcomes?
So I do tend to recommend, gradual a little bit more, but I do think the research does indicate what you say, that it's more or less pretty even overall. So the reason why I tend to go more with the gradual is I just don't want someone to start it and then not try it. And so I feel like in the flooded situation, they may, have a bad experience on the first try and then not want to do it again. Whereas I think that's less likely to happen when someone does it gradually. But again, what I'm saying sort of makes sense logically, but it's not necessarily exactly what the research says at this point.
And also, one thing I found interesting was that we have anxiety therapists that understand and know the benefits of gradual and flooding exposure, but they will stay away from those techniques because they don't want to put their clients into those stressful situations. So I'm just wondering what your take on that was.
That they don't want to put their clients into stressful situations
because they're already obviously
because they're
dealing with
already stressed.
anxiety. Yeah.
I mean, I would only agree with that if it's in the very, very acute phase. So meaning like if a combat soldier came back and, there was just nothing they could handle for the first, 2 to 4 weeks or something like that, I think maybe, that may be indicated at some point, but in very, very, very limited situations, like very limited. I think that for the most part, the more you delay it, the harder it becomes and the more it becomes a habit. And so the more you avoid it, the more you're likely you are going to avoid it in the future. So I think, that's not a very good technique or strategy unless the person is just in like a really, really severe crisis where they just, need absolute kind of rest for, 2 to 4 weeks. I can't imagine, doing it much more than that before I think the avoidance will become worse, so I don't agree with that strategy for the most part. And, it seems like, you don't agree with that strategy either because of the success that you've had with your exposure therapy and not just with yourself, but also with clients.
Yeah, 100%. I definitely don't agree with it. I can sort of understand from them thinking from a moral. So it was a few scientific studies that I did the research on, and I really found it interesting that it said that even though the therapist knew the results, they knew that the gradual and flooded therapy, how good it is for panic attacks and panic disorders, they were shying away from it because they didn't want to put their clients through it. So I found that really interesting, and I definitely think it's worth bringing up.
Yeah, it's almost like the overprotective parent, and,
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson, talks about this a lot with like children. And he says, you don't want them to brace for a catastrophe. You want to make them stronger, so, you can't make the world softer, but you can make yourself stronger. And so, that's what we have to do. And I think that's the sort of message too, that we need to get out there for a lot of people who are suffering from anxiety, who are suffering from, trauma, and to focus, I said, about PTSD earlier, but we also need to focus a lot on, PTG or post-traumatic growth. I feel like that's something that people should know more and more about because we all know people, and, maybe you're, a living example, Dean, who's of someone who, has went through trauma, went through something, and then came out stronger the other side. And so what we should really be doing is, focusing on those cases. Like, what are those people doing? What are the strategies that they're implementing? And then try to get others to use those strategies, because that will make you, not just, fear your disease, but actually overcome it and potentially make you stronger overall. And it seems like that's what you're, have been trying to do with some of your clients and with your message.
Yeah, definitely. And the number one rule I often say to myself and to people is that it's okay if the anxiety comes back. So people say anxiety recovery. That doesn't mean you're never going to feel anxiety again. We know that anxiety is a very useful emotion in the right setting. And it's not having the fear of it coming back. It's knowing that if it does come back, you've already overcome it. You've already had the tools. You've already done it. So it's not going to be as hard as the first time. And it has come back for me previously, and I just wanted to touch on the link between external stress or stress and anxiety. I really think there's a big link between the stress and anxiety, and when we have excessive stress, speaking from a personal aspect, I know that if I do not manage that stress, that is going to overflow into excessive anxiety. So you talk about one of the things that I do to mitigate my recovery journey on a day-to-day basis, and that would be to really try and control those external stresses that I can. So almost we hear about the stress bucket, like the analogy of all the stress of the day or all the stresses that we have. And eventually it overflows when there's too much stress in there. So I try and mitigate that the best I can to keep the stress levels down. And when I do that, that really helps with the anxiety levels as well.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Is like, you have to understand too what is, causing the stress in your life and what's causing you potentially, go down these, negative spirals. And I think that identifying, your I don't really like the word triggers, but I guess I will use it in this point. But the things that cause you to feel that way, if you don't identify them, then you can never ever correct them, right? So I think that's something that a lot of people need to focus on a little bit more. Is like, what is it that's causing it? Instead of just focusing on a particular supplement or maybe breath work. Again, all these things are wonderful, but they're all tools that we're sort of adding, what is it that's causing? And so I think, we need to, look at that a little bit more. One thing I wanted to ask you about today too was, obviously the book. So, there's a couple that you have now, but the one that you really, have kind of become famous for is Greater Than Panic. And so when did you write that book?
So that was, I teamed up with a therapist on a co-authored book. Untangle Your Anxiety was the first project, which again that had incredible success, which I'm very grateful for. I then wanted to get my own panic journey story out there in my own form, so I did it after that. So that would be maybe 2.5 years into the Instagram, so maybe 2020 that this came out, and it was just my own personal journey from when my father passed away to the anxiety and panic attacks occurring, going to the doctors. So there's one of the major things I advocate for on my community. You get so many people asking about anxiety, symptoms, etc. First protocol, always go to the doctor, because it might not even be anxiety in the first place. It could be something else. Get your symptoms checked out, have the medical tests run out, and then when they come back and tell you it's anxiety, if it is, then we can look at the resources that you have available. And like you mentioned, we can have therapy, medication, mindfulness, exercise. There's a plethora of tools that are available for people going through anxiety, which is exciting because it gives people hope and it gives people knowledge to know that there's not just one route out of this. There's many different routes that you can try. So yeah, I wanted to get that message through. There's lots of CBT in there. There's lots of scientific studies. I'm a big science geek when it comes to anxiety. So there's links to studies that I looked at over the time and looked at after. And there's some interviews in there as well. So we use QR codes to go into the interviews on Instagram, where I've interviewed mental health professionals over the time. So yeah, it's a real good project, one that I'm proud of. And it's just giving that person that hope, because I've been there. I know what it feels like when you feel isolated, you feel alone, and you feel like there's no road out of this. It's just to give them that inspiration to know that anyone can do it. If I can do it, anyone can do it.
Well, I like that attitude. And one thing there that I wanted to mention, there's a couple things. So about going to the doctor first, you are right. Like every now and then someone can actually just have like hyperthyroidism, and, that can be the cause of their anxiety. And then, then you don't need a psychiatrist, you need an endocrinologist to help you with that. So there are, some legitimate like underlying, conditions that certainly, can cause people to feel very, very anxious. And then the other thing that I wanted to ask you about was that on your journey, I think in your, I'm not sure if it's in your blog or your About Me on your website, I think you mentioned that initially when you had the panic disorder, you did go to a doctor, like you said, and did they give you a pharmaceutical at that point?
No, they didn't. So I went there once in a solution, sat down in the doctor's office. So first they ran the blood test, made sure everything was okay. It all came back okay. And then they said, we think you have anxiety or potentially an anxiety disorder. So they prescribed a book, a library book. And I couldn't believe it at the time. I thought I was being dismissed. I thought that they wasn't taking me seriously. But I went anyway. I went to the library and I got this book, and it was on. I can't remember the book to this day. So I'll have to probably have that conversation with my doctor, because everyone asked what was the book. So anyway, I went to the library, got this book, and it was just understanding the physical and emotional symptoms of anxiety and panic attacks, giving an explanation to why the heart's racing so fast, giving an explanation to why we hyperventilate, giving the explanation to why we have derealization, depersonalization. And when I read all of these things, it started to show me that I wasn't dying, that this was a natural process. So that psychoeducation was so important. And that's a major catalyst of why I've wrote the books as well, and why I advocate for psychoeducation to children from a young age, because I think it's such a powerful tool when it comes to anxiety disorders.
And so, do you ever have, patients or clients, tell you that they take medication and then they get better? Like, what are your overall thoughts, say, on like SSRIs and, Western medicine?
Yeah. So with DLC anxiety, is a community that we don't villainize anyone for whatever tool that they want to use. If it works for you, that's great, and that's your experience. So when it comes to medication, my personal view is that for people with high levels of anxiety, and like you mentioned before, if it's someone who's not able to get out of the house, if a medication such as an SSRI can work to help lower that anxiety level, to then help them engage in CBT tools or mindfulness or exercises, then I think it's a useful tool. Just using medication, I think that you need more than one strategy. So I don't demonize people for using it. I think it can be useful. And again, when we look at the science, we know a combination of CBT and medication often has the best results when it comes to panic and anxiety disorders.
Absolutely. So I asked you about pharmaceuticals. What about psychedelics?
I don't have any experience in it myself, but we have many people in the community, again, that use these things and have positive results. And this is people using psychedelics and having their own experience, telling community members that it reduces their anxiety, that they're a different person, etc. So yeah, we would never question their experience or try and play down their experience. So I would need to do more studies and research into this, but it definitely seems like a very interesting way of handling anxiety. And we really welcome all treatments, right? We welcome all treatments. As long as the treatment is safe and effective, then as many tools as possible for someone going through an anxiety disorder. I say the more the merrier.
So you have how many people in your community, and how do they mostly interact?
So on DLC anxiety, we have on the Instagram, we have 1.6 million community members. On TikTok, we have 1 million members. We have the DLC anxiety app. And also on the website, we get between 20 and 30 million people visiting the website a month. So it's a really engaged community through the app and through just the comment sections of Instagram and of TikTok. The comment sections are almost their own communities. I've had so many people reach out to me in DMs saying that they've found best friends just from coming into the community. So and that's one of the catalysts of why I get up and do this still 6-7 years on, is that every day I get a heartwarming message that someone's seen the community and it's give them light, it's give them hope. And they've got support that maybe they're being dismissed in their own home. Maybe they're being dismissed with their family members, but they've found a community where people are helping and supporting each other, telling people what works for one, and just, helping them on their road to recovery.
And so what are some of the things that people are mentioning that are being implemented by other members that people are saying works really, really well? Is there anything that's, been discovered recently in 2024, maybe 2023, that you can really think of that stands out?
I would say one thing that I think stands out for me and for some community members would be virtual reality with phobias and panic disorders even. So using virtual reality headsets and doing these gradual exposures and flooded exposures without even going into the situation. So it can be the initial stage of maybe they have a fear of flying, so they put the virtual headset on and they put them on the plane. It gives them that experience, and then I've seen some great results from that, and I think it's very exciting. Just another tool for someone to use, and that might be beneficial for someone who's just not ready to go on that plane, for example. So just the step before. So yeah, that's really exciting. Virtual reality with that.
That's incredible. So is this something that's fairly accessible to people, or is this something that's not so accessible, or how do people get a hold of this?
I would say that speak to your therapist regarding it. I wouldn't say that it is widely accessible, but I would say there is more therapists using this. And I think it's just a great tool because, yeah, we're using technology. The side effects, there's no real side effects. So, I mean, this can be done from the comfort of your therapy session or comfort from your own home. And it's just an interesting way to do exposure therapy in a safe environment. And I think it's just like a nice kickstart to then build up to actually go into the location and doing it.
That's incredible. I didn't even know that existed. And so how does it actually work? Like you put on the headset, say we've talked about the grocery store today, so let's just stick with that. So say, you put on the headset and then somehow you program it to that you're going into a busy grocery store and
100%. Then. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So you program to go into a busy grocery store, and as you know, with these virtual headsets, it almost feels like you're there. It really does. And I've used some of these headsets as well. I've had the luxury of people sending them to me for me to use them, and the demonstration I had was on a plane because it's something that I struggled with in the past. And it really feels like you're there. It feels like you're sat in the seat of the plane. So it feels like you're there in the shopping center, but obviously you're in the therapy room. So I think there's just that knowledge in your mind, knowing that you're safe in the therapy room, but you're also getting the exposure for the brain that you're in this situation and this is what it feels like. So you're also getting that anxiety as well to then be able to teach the brain that it's okay to be in that situation, even if anxiety comes.
That's incredible. Yeah, because, there's some people who, they get so far back or so far stuck that it's difficult for them to implement some of the strategies. So the biggest one by far that I can think of, in terms of mental health is we know that exercise is incredible for depression. It's incredible for anxiety. It's incredible for everything. It's literally just as good for your mental health as your physical health. Like exercise is incredible for you. But we also know that a lot of people are too depressed to exercise. Like they just feel like they can't get up and do it. And so, I don't have any data behind this whatsoever, but I've always felt that, maybe saunas would help people like that, just because all you have to do is sit and, you sweat. So when you're done, it almost feels like there's like you accomplish something. And you did, sitting in a sauna when it's very hot is very uncomfortable. It's amazing. Mm-hmm. So you are accomplishing something, but you're not actually moving, and I think that it's just less intimidating to say to someone, to get inside a sauna than to go for a walk. But, what's sort of the strategies that have been delved out in the community, or that you have, or maybe that are in the book, that you say to people when they say that they're too depressed to exercise?
Yeah, so again, number one, I completely agree with you that exercise is the medication to you without the side effects, only the positive endorphins, everything that it brings with it. And exercise was a key part to my recovery. Often I felt that when anxiety was brewing, I would look at my life and realize I wasn't exercising. So I advocate for going out for a walk, like you say, exercise if you can. But if you can, and I think it's worth noting, because I don't think a lot of people talk about this, is that when you're dealing with anxiety and panic attacks, when you make that first step to go to a gym, so maybe you go to the gym, it's overwhelming to go to the gym, you then go on a treadmill and your heart starts racing, you start to hyperventilate. So that it's almost mimicking the symptoms of the anxiety and panic attack. And I've had many people say, I just can't do it. I can't go on the treadmill because I start to get anxious because of the feelings. So I totally understand and get that. And I can resonate with people who say that. But what I say in return is that just shows you that you're doing something that is exercise that's good for you, that you're perfectly okay and you're perfectly safe, and you're having those same symptoms as when you're anxious. But when you're anxious, you think that you are in danger, you think that something is wrong. Well, this is showing you that you can have the same symptoms when doing something such as on a treadmill. But yeah, I totally understand that it can be overwhelming for people. I had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Amen 2 or 3 times, who's a fantastic psychiatrist in the field, and he really advocates for cold water plunges, so getting the fight or flight system kicking. But he also says that when people are going through anxiety, they're often overwhelmed and dealing with all this stress, so he doesn't like putting them into a more stressful situation. But I think the data behind cold water therapy is very exciting. And I think that can be a great way to reduce anxiety and stress if you're able to do that.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I actually have had 2 cold showers already today. Like I'm a big fan
Nice.
of using cold water. Sometimes I don't, go for too long. Sometimes I will go for, a little bit longer. So it sort of depends upon, my day. I don't really have like a particular like set protocol, and I don't have a cold plunge, but I do know that, I think it's if you do about 90 seconds to 3 minutes of, I forget the temperature that's used. It's not too cold though. I think it's even like 68 degrees or something like that. There was a study that I posted. I'll have to find it. But it can raise your dopamine, in some people by like 2.5 times for like 2 to 6 hours. So, there is quite a bit of evidence that it can, in fact, raise your neurotransmitters, and dopamine, as we know, is responsible for making you feeling good, responsible for motivation. And, motivation is so good because once you have that motivation, it's easier to kind of build momentum. It's easier to keep momentum than it is to, build it at the beginning. And, having that cold plunge, may give you that dopamine in order to, get it done. But yeah, I do understand also if you're going through a very stressful period, adding more stress on top of it is not necessarily, the best thing to do. So you want to do it when you're in a more of a rested state. It's the same thing with, exercise as well. If you're just starting, do it gradually. You have to be able to build up to a point where, you can do it really aggressively. And even then, the latest research, not to get too off topic on that, but, Dr. Andy Galpin, Dr. Peter Attia, like all these guys are saying that, 70 to 80% of your cardio should actually be done in zone 2. So, literally, 2 out of 3 or, 3 out of 4 of your workouts or more should just be you like walking. And then you have, maybe one workout a week where you kind of go, full tilt, so to speak, in order to, maximize the cardiovascular benefits. Anything on that before I wanted to move on? I want to ask you something about Abigail Shrier, but any comment on that before I move on?
I just wanted to say that when I was going through the anxiety disorder, I took to cycling. So I was working in a sales office at the time, and I would start my day by just cycling to work. And you mentioned about that window of time it gave you, and it just really resonated with me when you said that. It gave me like a 2 to 3 hour breathing space of where the anxiety level was at a reduced state, and I believe that was from the exercise. So yeah, a big advocate for exercise in whatever capacity you can do it.
Yeah, and one just more important point about that is that, I do think that if you exercise regularly, there is maybe a certain baseline of anxiety that is reduced overall. But I think for the most part, it does come from the acute effects, which means, why you have to do it, almost daily, so the more often you do it, the more benefit you are going to get. And, you are going to feel, less anxiety likely on the day that you exercise, more than on the days that you don't. But again, you do have to keep track of, rest versus recovery. I use the Aura watch for that, but not paid to say that or anything. But, it is something you have to balance out, rest and recovery. Yeah, one thing that I really wanted to ask you about today, I kind of asked this to most people lately that I've been talking to about mental health, is the book Abigail Shrier wrote. I actually forget the name of it. I think it's actually just called Bad Therapy. But she was on Joe Rogan fairly recently. She was talking about how sometimes therapy can be bad for people. Is there anyone in your community that's like reached out and said that, I went to my therapist and things actually got worse, but since I've been in your community, I've kind of learned, some new techniques that are actually better. And now I'm improving, just by following DLC anxiety. But when I was, going to see my therapist, things actually weren't improving. Have you had any, stories or comments like that within your community?
We have, yeah. So on Amazon, if you watch on the books, we've had quite reoccurring comments saying that I read this book and it gave me more educational tools and it's helped reduce my anxiety more than 10 years of therapy. And I've seen that quite a few times. So yeah, we do have that. I don't demonize therapy. I think it's good for many people. But yeah, again, it's not a one size fits all when it comes to anxiety recovery. So therapy might not work for someone. You might not have that relationship with the therapist. It may not be the specific therapist for what you need. So for example, if you're going through a panic disorder, maybe talking about your past traumas and someone who's not CBT focused, such as doing gradual and flooded exposures, might not be beneficial for you. So I think it's very important to find the right therapist. And if you do find the right therapist, I think it can be very useful, especially for people who don't have a support network around them, who don't have friends to open up to, who don't have maybe they're being dismissed from family members. I think therapy is very useful in that sense, very useful in highlighting tools for people. But the hard work has to be done by the person at the end of the day. You can have all the tools, you can be given all the knowledge, but it's you who has to get up and has to face the anxiety and teach the brain that this is just a misfire, that everything I'm feeling is uncomfortable, but it's not dangerous. And when you do that repeatedly, you start to show the brain over time. I wish there was a switch where you could just turn it on and off and that's okay, but it's over time. Like anything, you have to practice these tools, and over time your anxiety will reduce, it will come down, and I believe that everyone has the capacity to recover.
Yeah, I think you mentioned one really important point there is like it's not going to happen overnight. Like it's going to be progressive, and you also may have setbacks. So,
Yeah.
say for someone who, suffers from, panic attacks, maybe you're having, one, let's just say you're having one a week, and then, the next month you only have one the following month, and then say the month after that, you're back to having two or three, and you think, oh, this doesn't work anymore. It's not true that it doesn't work. Like your frequency is going down. It's just that it's not eliminated completely. And I think people sometimes get stuck on that. And so you are like likely going to have setbacks. Like no one goes down like straight down. I'm kind of doing like a staircase thing for people who aren't who can't see it on video. So it is going to take a little bit of time, and I think that you probably see that within your community. People say that it's two steps forward and one step back, and that's always not what we want to hear. But with anxiety in particular, it is that way for a lot of people because there's so many unknowns. There's so many things that could happen that could potentially set you back. And so if you're not willing to understand that there's going to be setbacks, then you're probably going to get deflated very, very easily and maybe not put in the work.
No, I completely agree with you, and we do hear that a lot. And I experienced it, like you say. One week maybe I had two panic attacks, and then The week after, I didn't have a panic attack, and I thought I was free. I thought I'd recovered. And then the week after, I might have 4 panic attacks. But like you say, I think putting it into perspective, understanding what you say, that the frequency is coming down overall, you're on the right path, but it's not a linear path. I love how you mentioned that. And also we need to just be a little bit gentle to ourselves to understand that we have a negative bias as it is. As humans, we're wired up with this negative bias. So when we do have a panic attack, we instantly see it as a failure, especially when we're trying to overcome it and recover from it. So I would say that try and change that inner narrative, that listen to the inner dialogues that you're saying. So when this happens, don't see it as a setback, just see it as more learning. So you've more exposure. You've gone through another panic attack. I often say to everyone, you've already overcome every single anxious moment that you've been through. You've already done it. So yeah, speak to yourself in a more positive manner. I'm not the biggest advocate for fairy tales and positive self-talk, but I do think gratitude and journaling your recovery steps is beneficial, especially when you have this negative lens on thinking that you're not going to recover, you're isolated, you're alone, and all these symptoms are not anxiety. I think it's good to just put it into perspective, and maybe it could be a video journal, it could be a voice journal, it could be writing, however you want to put it down. But I think it's worth noting every little step that you take, because that can be really good motivation for you as well.
Yeah, I think it's also too, like, noting it down objectively, will make you less emotional and, like, more likely, I think, to make the correct decision to keep going, because you understand that, hey, even though it's not a linear process, I am doing better objectively. And one thing I wanted to ask you too, did you ever come across your research, Barry McDonough and his book, Panic Away? I was just wondering if you came across that at all.
I have heard of him. I haven't read the book, but I believe he focuses on panic disorder, right?
Yeah, so he talks a lot about really, he has a lot of the same ideas, I think, that you have. So he says that, when you're feeling a panic disorder, you should actually run towards it. And so the reason he says that is, he says that, when you're having a panic attack, your amygdala is just firing and firing, and we can't use what's called, our prefrontal cortex or our smart brain. And so because of that, we literally can't think straight. We literally can't think, objectively. We literally can't, think rationally or with any kind of, emotional intelligence, because our amygdala is just going crazy. And so he says that if you say, like, bring it on, I want the panic to come, then at that point, your amygdala shuts off because you're no longer scared. You're telling your brain, I'm not scared. And so at that point, your prefrontal cortex is something you can start to use. And then, hopefully you calm down and the panic attack goes away. But if the opposite happens, so say if, you're in this moment of panic and you're like, oh shit, or oh no, like, don't come on, like, I really hope I don't have a panic attack right now. Then your amygdala is just told, like, you're just sending signal after signal to your amygdala that you're scared. Mm-hmm. And so you're super afraid. Your amygdala's firing like crazy, and you can't use your prefrontal cortex at all. So you have this vicious panic attack. And I thought it was interesting the way that he, explained it. And so, through your research and through the things that you do, it seems like you're using a lot of the, similar techniques. Like you're saying, like, when people are, scared, when you have, something that, really is giving you a lot of anxiety, you should actually flood yourself, which is, a technique that you're using, which is, very similar to, running towards it. And so, that's sort of like almost like an on the spot technique that you could use, if something happens when you don't want it to, because flooding, obviously, you're intentionally doing therapy, you're intentionally going to the mall. And yes, you can avoid going to the mall, but what if you're out and you see someone that, you didn't want to see or something like that, it just comes up all of a sudden. That's sort of a technique that I think Barry teaches that you can use kind of on the spot to help. And is there any other sort of like on the spot techniques that you and the community members are using that have, been successful?
So regarding what you mentioned about that, I would say 98% agree with everything that you said about him. I would say where I maybe a little bit different is that for people going through anxiety and they're in this fight or flight mode, saying bring it on, bring it on, bring it on may be a little bit too much for those people. So I often say just understand that it's okay to know that you're going to feel uncomfortable, but tell yourself that you're not in danger. So don't tell yourself that it's going to feel comfortable. Yes, I understand bring it on. And I do agree with that and believe that. And that's what I did. And that was my mindset. I think anxiety recovery, the mindset shift is one of the most powerful things for recovery. So that was my mindset, to put myself in that situation. But for people who may feel a little bit vulnerable and know how overwhelming and stressful these anxiety symptoms are, just know that it's okay to feel uncomfortable. And sometimes you might not want to feel like you have to bring it on, but if you just sit with that uncomfort and know that it passes through the body, then you've done just as good a job as that person who's motivated to bring it on. So that's what I would just say a little different.
Yeah, no, and I can agree with that. And I'm thinking back to the person who has just come back from war, and they're in a very, very critical PTSD state. And we're saying, maybe you just need to rest and not do anything right now before we, start treatment. And so, some people may be in a state where, having that anxiety bringing on is just too much. They're just not in a physiological state where they're prepared to do that technique where it's actually going to work. Where some people may be in a physiological state where if they say that technique or if they use that technique, they will in fact get better, or, it will work for them.
One technique I would like to mention is deep belly breathing. So we know when we're anxious, we're breathing shallow breathing, often from the upper part of your body. Deep belly breathing was really helpful for me, but doing the learning how to breathe correctly from the diaphragm in a non-anxious state. So I often get people who say, I tried deep breathing when I was in the middle of a panic attack for the first time, and it made my anxiety worse. The anxiety got worse. And of course that's going to happen when you're trying to implement something in already a stressful situation. But if you can learn deep belly breathing in a state when you're not anxious, I think that's a really powerful tool, because you can teach the body how to breathe correctly. And lo and behold, when you're in that anxious state, after all the practice, you start to do it subconsciously without even knowing, or you can put yourself into that situation. And if you can do it correctly, I believe you can get yourself out of the fight or flight mode into the rest and digest mode very quickly by just controlling your breathing, which we know brings the heart rate down and just regulates everything.
Are you a mouth breather or a nose breather?
Mouth.
You are, hey? So are you doing anything to try to correct that, or?
Probably not, to be honest. If you want my honest answer, probably, yeah. There's always extra things that I can do.
Is that something in your community, though, that a lot of people struggle with? Or is there any success stories of people saying, when they switch from mouth breathing to nose breathing, they felt better overall?
Oh, 100%, yes. Many people, because of the techniques that we teach with the diaphragmatic breathing, is obviously breathing through the nose and really regulate that breathing. We've had lots of success with people changing the breathing patterns and behavior. And like you say, breathing in through the nose can be really helpful. But I would say that it's always a work in progress, and not everyone's 100% right. So I would definitely say that is something that I would work on as well in the future.
Yeah, I need to work on it too. I got the mouth tape, but I just don't like putting it on too much, But Eventually, I gotta do it. I know I only have you for a few more minutes, but just one question that I wanted to ask you. It seems to be coming up a little bit, and I haven't really thought about it, too much until the last maybe few years or so. But is there any difference in treating men and women differently with anxiety? Do you feel like there's some techniques that work more for women than with men, or do you feel like there's something that works more for women than men?
It's a great question, and that's the first time I've been asked that question specifically to men and women. I think my initial response would be no. But I do think that I would have to think and really think about that question before giving a more educated answer. But I wouldn't say that I see any major differences when I speak. So one thing to mention as well, which is important, as we're two males speaking, is that 83% of my community is women. So that's a
Oh, wow.
conversation. That's a conversation in itself. Men don't. There's still a stigma to men within the community, and if you look at my community statistics, it shows you 80 odd percent are women. So I would say that the majority of people I speak to in whole are women. But I would say that when I do speak to men, I often see a similar idea and willingness and wanting to like a more I would say a more strategic way to overcome it. Almost like that they know anxiety to them it's a problem that they have to fix. Where I would say that maybe women are more gentle with themselves over the process. For the men, it is more, I've got this problem, I need to fix it, I'm going to try everything. And for the women, I would say that they're just a little bit more gentle on themselves regarding that. But I wouldn't say there was any major differences on techniques or different things that women try over men. But like I say, regarding my community, I don't have the best demographics to give an educated answer.
Well, I certainly still appreciate your answer. And yeah, same here. Like I can't, say, oh yeah, I think that, women responded better to ketamine than say men, or, men responded better to cannabis than say women. Like I've never really noticed that. But I do think it's something that maybe we need to, tease out in the literature a little bit, because I do think that there may be some differences, and maybe there are some techniques out there that we haven't discovered that may be more effective, for men versus women. Like I think men, like to have that sort of power feeling, a lot, that especially for, coming out of depression, hopelessness is obviously the hallmark of depression. Feeling kind of like, powerful, I guess, would be more of like the opposite. But again, when, a woman is more like, feels very, very cared for, that may give her more solace, or may feel her more powerful than, a man who may be doing something else that makes him powerful. So yeah, it's something that I don't know too much about either, but I've just heard some people have some conversations about it, so I figured I'd ask you. I know we only have a couple minutes left there, and you've got so many resources to tell us about. So, Dean, before I let you go, where can people learn more about your community? What are your Twitter handles, your Instagram handles, your TikTok handles, and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so first I'd like to thank for the invite here. It's been fantastic speaking to another male doing incredible things with people with anxiety. So thank you so much for everything that you do with your community and with all your patients.
Thank you.
You can follow me on Instagram, DLC Anxiety, the website, the same name. On TikTok, DLC Anxiety Worldwide. If you haven't downloaded the DLC Anxiety app, that is free as well. And also, if you want some psychoeducation, there's 3 books on there on Amazon. So, and all the links are in the bio on Instagram. And we're now delving a little bit into the wellness side of things and putting on retreats with some excellent hosts. And getting people all together in a safe container to teach them CBT tools and techniques in a safe environment, using exercise, for example, using these CBT techniques and wonderful things like you say, sauna therapy, what cold water plunges, just being in nature itself, and all the benefits that mindfulness bring. So we've got that coming on as well, which is really exciting.
That's fantastic. Building community is fantastic. So I imagine that, the people who go there, oftentimes when they go to places like this, they meet people and they become friends for life, And so, I imagine that that'll happen with a lot of people in your community because everyone's like-minded, everyone's going there for the same reason. And so everyone's trying to get better. Everyone's trying to improve, when you're around that community and you just kind of feel that sort of like oneness that everyone, has your back and you're all, striving for the same goal, that can be so therapeutic in itself. So it's fantastic that you're doing those retreats, and it's great that you're doing, all the work that you're doing online. So thank you again so much for coming on the podcast. I really do appreciate it, Dean. And thank you again, everyone, for listening. And as always, I'll be back again with another episode soon.